Okay, we're quickly going to make some sourdough bread. Really easy, been making it for about 8 to 9 months. It's lovely as well. Basic ingredients, dead easy. All you need for this one is strong white bread flour, salt, a little bit of brown sugar, 250 ml of water, and this is the magic ingredient, that's sourdough culture. This sourdough culture is about 8 months old. That sounds a bit gross, but you use most of it making your bread, and then basically you feed it with some more flour and water to top it up, and then just keep it in the fridge, and that keeps topping over. So that's what makes the bread rise instead of using yeast. So all you need for this is 500 grams of strong white bread flour. You need 300 grams of your sourdough culture. You need about a tablespoon of salt, a tablespoon of brown sugar, and 250 ml of water, and that's all you need for sourdough. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to measure out the ingredients and throw it in a bowl, and job done. Okay, that's all the ingredients added to the bowl. So that's the flour, the sourdough culture, the water, the sugar and salt. So that's all it is. Now if you're doing this by hand, you need to knead that now for about 10 minutes. I don't do mine by hand, I use a mixer with a dough hook for that. So we're just going to get this mixing and kneading for 10 minutes. Okay, I've got the dough hook on the mixer, so we're just going to get that mixing now for 10 minutes. Okay, once you've kneaded your dough for about 10 minutes, it'll look something like that. So all I'm going to do now is transfer this to a big bowl which I've greased. So just lightly grease the bowl and transfer the dough to it, and then put it somewhere nice and warm for 3 hours, covered with a moist tea towel or some cling film or something like that. And we'll see you in 3 hours time. Okay, so there's my sourdough dough. It's in the bowl which I've lightly greased. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to cover this with a wet tea towel, and then that's where I'll put mine. I'll put it in my hot water cupboard, or whatever you want to call it, and I'll leave it there for 3 hours. So I'm going to put it there, and we'll come back and I'll show you what you do with it in 3 hours time. It's almost like it was built for it. So there's my hot water cupboard, and there's a few pipes that are coming into the tank, and my mixing bowl just sits lovely perched on there. So that's going to sit there for the next 3 hours with the, like I say, a wet tea towel over it just to keep the dough moist. So we'll come back in 3 hours time. Okay, the dough's been proven in the airing cupboard for 3 hours, so it's got bigger in size. What we've got to do now is just knock it back. So on a floured surface, all you do is put your dough on it. And all we're doing is knocking all the air out of it, just rolling it. Make sure it's well floured, otherwise it will stick. You need a bit more. Just put a bit more down. So just roll it, turn it. And then just bring it together in a ball. And this recipe makes 2 loaves. So once you've got you've knocked it back and you've reformed it, just cut it in 2. Again, just reform them into a ball, just fold it under itself so you get 2 balls of dough. And what I've done, I've prepped 2 sort of Victoria sponge cake tins, and all I've done is grease those and flour them. And all you've got to do now is put your dough in those. And then they want covering with greased cling film and just leaving somewhere warm again for another 2.5 hours to prove. So we'll see those in 2.5 hours. Okay, so I've just covered the 2 loaves with cling film. I've floured the cling film a little bit so it doesn't stick to the top of the loaves, and so they're just going to sit there now for 2.5 hours to prove. Okay, so the bread's been proving for another 2.5 hours. As you can see, it's expanded again, so that's ready for the oven now. So set your oven to about 210 to 220 and get it nice and hot. The other thing that you want to put in it is some steaming water. So I've got like a Yorkshire pudding tin here and I've filled it with boiling water. I'm going to put that in the bottom of the oven just now for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to leave that in while the bread's cooking, but I'm going to put it in the oven now so that the oven's full of steam, and then I'll come back to show you what I'm going to do. Okay, I've put the hot water in the bottom of the oven in the pan, so that's going to be creating steam in the oven, because you get a really good crust on your bread if you have steam in your oven. And while that's just warming through and the oven's getting steamy, I'm just going to cut the top of the bread. Now you can do this with a very sharp knife, but I use kitchen scissors, it's dead easy. So all I do is down the middle of the bread, okay, a long line, just cut straight down the middle like that. So same on both loaves. And then a shorter line just either side, so you've got 3 sort of splits, and that just lets the bread expand and rise. So 3 slits, and then the final thing you need to do, a little sprinkling of flour, so just over the top of the bread. And you see what this looks like when it comes out at the end. So this is proper sourdough bread, best bread you'll ever taste, and it's fantastic toasted. It makes the best toast ever. Bit of toast just with butter on. Sometimes you just fancy eating a full loaf of this stuff just with a nice thick spreading of proper butter. None of this margarine crap. Some good Lurpak butter on it, and it's delish. Okay, so that's ready for the oven now. The only ingredients that you've put in this, remember, it's just flour, water, salt, bit of sugar, and some of your sourdough culture, which I'll post the link to of how you make your sourdough culture, because it takes about a week to make that, and that's dead easy as well. It's just flour, water, and a little bit of yogurt to get the bacteria in there. So we're going to lob this in the oven now, so we'll come back in about 40 minutes. It'll have been in the oven at 210 for 40 minutes, and we should have some lovely bread. Okay, after about 40 minutes, your sourdough should be cooked. As you can see, the splits have opened up. Flour's made it look nice, and it should be nice and risen and crispy. Gorgeous. So you can check just by turning one out and tapping the bottom of it, and it should sound like a hollow drum. So we'll see if that's the case. All you do is hold the bottom of it, tap it. That's cooked. And there you go. 2 fresh sourdough loaves out the oven. Like I say, makes cracking sandwiches, toast, just lovely. And just on its own with good butter, absolutely gorgeous. Okay, now we've got the sourdough sort of proving and getting ready. I obviously need to make sure that I've got enough of my sourdough culture for next week when I make next week's bread. So what I've actually got last week when I made my sourdough bread, I made my sourdough culture, or carried on using it, because some of it has now gone into my bread, 300 grams of it, which leaves me probably about the same ready to top up. So next week I can make some more bread and then still have my culture left over for the following week. So you actually use your culture week after week after week after week. Some families, I've been told, have a sourdough culture that goes back to like the 30s, where the great-great-grandma made sourdough bread and the culture has been passed from generation to generation. And you can also share it. So I've got my culture here, which I've been propagating. I could give you guys some, and basically you do what I'm doing now. You feed it with some flour and water and make your own culture and propagate it. So it's sort of something that can be passed on. So all I'm going to do is top up my culture for next week, and the way I'm going to do that, you use 300 grams of culture to make your bread. So I like to have about 600 grams on the go ready for next week. So 300 to use, 300 to then use for topping up. So all I do, you have equal measures of flour. So again, with your strong bread flour, I'm going to have 200 grams of that. You haven't got to be bang on, but obviously try and get as close as you can. So we've got 201 grams of that. You then have equal amounts of water, so 200 grams of water. So that's going to take us up to 400. And then our culture. So again, 200 grams of our culture mix. I'm just going to give it a bit of a stir. So 200 grams of culture, so that's going to take us up to about 600. I might just need to scrape the bowl a little bit. I'm just going to put the camera down because I just need to scrape the bowl. So as you can see, that's gone up to 602. Last week's culture now is totally gone. So what I've managed to do from last week's culture is make 2 loaves of sourdough bread today, which is now proven in the airing cupboard. And now my culture that I'm now going to mix up and put somewhere warm just for 24 hours, and then I'll pop it in the fridge, and I'll use that next week. So 300 grams of that next week will now make 2 more loaves of bread, leaving me 300 grams to top up and recultivate like I've just done now. Job done. So sourdough bread's really good for you as such, because you know there's not much in it. There's natural yeasts, that's how it rises. The culture that I'm making over there, when that sits out in the room temperature or in the airing cupboard, it just gets natural yeast from the air that's floating around. And yeah, so that's it. So I'm just going to mix this together, and I'm going to put it in the airing cupboard for 24 hours, and then I'm going to pop it in the fridge and use it next week. Okay, so there's the culture now. I've mixed it all up. As you can see, it's already starting to bubble. It starts sort of fermenting almost straight away, and that's why it's called sourdough, because it does ferment. You obviously don't get alcohol, but you get that sour smell, which is yeasty and lovely, particularly with the bread. So what I'm going to do with that now, it's starting to bubble. Look at that, I've literally only just mixed it. So it's showing you that it's alive, because it's now eating the yeast that's in there. The natural yeast is now eating the flour and feeding on the sugars and stuff that's in the flour, and it's creating carbon dioxide already. So I'm going to cover that with cling film. And I'm just going to pop that in the airing cupboard now for 24 hours. So where the yeast multiplies, and then I'll put it in the fridge and use it next week to make the bread and to get my new lot of culture going. Dead easy.